Hello, hello! Welcome back to Loki's Librarian. If you are new here, welcome. I am a librarian, Katrina, and on Sundays I do this thing called Books and Booze, where I review a book and mix up a cocktail. This month we're looking at How Power Silences Victims, which is a cheery, happy topic for December. Starting with this week's book, Game Over, Jerry Sandusky, Penn State, and the Culture of Silence, with a massive amount of glare off of that cover. This is by Bill Moushey and Bob Dvorchak. I hope I'm saying their names correctly. The accompanying cocktail is The Great Silence, which is 1.5 ounces of rye, 3/4 ounce Aperol, 1/4 ounce maraschino liqueur, a 1/2 ounce of lime juice, and 3 dashes of absinthe. So let's do this. This story was revolting for those who are not familiar with the absolute shit show that was Penn State back in 2011, 2012. It's revolting, but the authors did an outstanding job explaining the backstory of how exactly this came to happen. And for better or for worse, it starts with Joe Paterno. Not sure if I have enough rye in here. I think I have enough rye. I might just have a shot of that afterwards just for grins to get rid of it. It's not even a shot. It's going to be like a sip of that afterwards. But for now, we start with Joe Paterno. Okay. Because he was the man behind what became the juggernaut of Penn State football. All right. In the author's words, quote, "Just as Zeus ruled the world from Mount Olympus, Joe Paterno reigned supreme over the world of college football from Mount Nittany." All right, he was the guy. All right, he knew everything that went on with his team, and we're going to come back to that to understand why. I mean, the authors did a hell of a job laying out, without ever actually opening themselves up to possible libel. They were like, did he really not know? So he started his career at Penn State University as an assistant coach to Charles Rip Engel, who in May of 1950. 3/4 ounces. I have to eyeball 3/4 ounces. Hold on. That's close enough. This is going to be a bitter cocktail because Aperol tends to be very bitter, and Aperol is a bitterant, actually. All right. And rye is also very bitter. Okay, so he started in 1950. Now, Paterno was highly educated, all right? He wasn't just your typical dumb jock or anything like that, right? He had a college degree from Brown University. He was well-read and well-cultured. He enjoyed classical Greek literature. He enjoyed opera. He enjoyed classical music and football, of course. I mean, never mind the Nittany Lions. You don't become a football coach if you don't love the game. Like, I would never in a million years even think of it. I understand there's an oblong ball. I understand it's called a pigskin. It's about where my understanding of football stops. I'm just not a football person. All right, now Paterno's parents were a bit disappointed. I think his mom especially, because she I think wanted him to be a lawyer or something like that. His father was a bit more prosaic on the matter. When Paterno told him he wanted to be a full-time coach as a career, his father told him, quote, "Whatever you do, make an impact. Don't waste your life just winning football games. Have an impact." And he did. And scandals notwithstanding, his impact was largely for the better. All right. I mean, the scandals are what he becomes known for, and frankly, rightly so. We'll come back to that too. But he did good things as a coach. All right. He had a massive impact on his players, very much for the better. All right. He insisted that all of his players had to keep their grades up. There was no D's for a degree mentality. If they couldn't keep their GPA up, then they couldn't play for the coach. It was that simple. Subsequently, an inordinate number of Penn State players went on to work for like Fortune 500 companies. There was at least one astronaut mentioned in the mix. An ungodly amount of professional NFL players came out of Penn State. All of these achievements are spelled out in the book. I think the authors were outstandingly fair to Joe Paterno, given everything that happened. All right. It's going to be interesting doing dashes, because dashes are usually little tiny things, and there's no little tiny spigot here. So I just have to I'm calling that 3 dashes. Just tastes just exactly like black licorice. It's the wormwood, the anise in it. Then in 1965, Engel retired, and Paterno is the heir apparent and was rapidly appointed to be the head coach. And he began his grand experiment, explaining to his recruits, quote, "What if we had the best of both worlds? What if Penn State kids were smart enough to graduate from Harvard and athletic enough to beat Alabama?" Now, not a football context person, but based on context, I'm guessing Alabama's team is pretty dang good. And he did it. All right, like I said, his players were by no means your stereotypical dumb jock. They went on to do massive things in the world. Good things, by and large. Because Sandusky was also one of his players. Let me shake this up. So from 65 on, he's the guy in charge, and he's building an empire. an insular empire. So insular that the conditions became quite ripe for a dirty underbelly. One of the experts referred to in the book is a lady who I believe successfully sued the Catholic Church on behalf of the victims there. And she compared the conditions at Penn State as being as insular and protective as the churches. And we all know about the scandals there. That's actually the topic of next week's book.
I love Jesus!
Paterno did build his empire, and his teams were impressive. They were winning game after game. Maybe not all of them, but a majority of the games played were wins. To build a good team of players, you need a good staff for support. And in 1969, Paterno hired Jim Weaver and Jerry Sandusky. Now, Sandusky had first been a player at Penn State under Paterno, and he had worked as a graduate assistant for Paterno in 1966 before taking a couple of other coaching positions, like elsewhere. It's outlined in the book, but not relevant for my review. Sandusky was initially hired in charge of tackles and tight ends. For the record, still not a football person. I have absolutely no idea what that means. But not too long after he was moved to be in charge of defense, a position he held until his retirement in 1999. More on that in a bit. I'm not sure. It's not so vile and revolting that I'm going to drop it and say I'm not drinking this, but I'm not sure. We'll have to see if it grows on me. Now, Sandusky had a reputation as a prankster, right? He always enjoyed pranks. So to me, that translates as asshole because, pranks are rarely funny. They're usually mean-spirited at somebody else's expense. The book describes it as childish, like throwing water balloons from car windows. I personally call that assault, but then again, what the hell do I know? I don't know football. Maybe it's funny in the world of jocks. Now, Sandusky did marry Dorothy Dottie Gross, and shortly after they married, they learned that they were unable to have children. So they opted to adopt instead, and they ended up adopting ultimately 6 children. And in 1977, Sandusky incorporated the Second Mile, which is a registered not-for-profit whose stated purpose was to mentor troubled children, involving them in games and athletics, trying to help them turn their lives around. The Second Mile quickly became involved through Sandusky with Penn State sporting events, and they were very heavily intertwined. And Sandusky would bring kids to the games as his guests so that they could see these live-action games up front in person, like from the sidelines or the skybox or whatever fancy shit they have going on at sporting events. But he would host charity golf tournaments for the Second Mile at Penn State Golf Course. Paterno was a frequent guest speaker at the Second Mile. And Sandusky, give the devil his due, was a hell of a defensive coordinator. Again, whatever the hell that means. Basically, the two of them created a pretty unbeatable team. I mean, they didn't win every single game, but they won a majority of the games that they played in. And that's, that's all that matters when you're in football, right? And here's where the insular nature of State College, Pennsylvania, which is where Penn State University is located, becomes so very insidious. Over the course of Paterno's career, Penn State football would become a billion-dollar enterprise, all right, with corporate sponsorships from like Nike, and there were others. I called Nike specifically, but I don't remember who else. You could actually go to the Penn State website. I did look it up. They actually have a list of their corporate sponsors. I don't know who among those were sponsors when the scandals came to light. But Nike sticks out because that's a big one, right? All of this was done under Paterno, who arranged the sponsorships and arranged the scholarships and arranged everything, right? Now, despite having the winningest teams and the stellar performance of his defensive coordinator, in May of 1999, Paterno informed Sandusky that he is not the heir apparent and would never be head coach at Penn State. And shortly after that, on July 1st, 1999, Sandusky announces his retirement. He says the 1999 season is going to be my last as defensive coordinator for Penn State. After that, I'm retiring. Now, Paterno's stated reason for Sandusky not being the heir apparent was that Sandusky was too busy with his charity, the Second Mile, to effectively be a head coach. And Sandusky's retirement package was a pretty sweet deal. He had an initial lump sum of $148,271 with a yearly pension of $58,898. So every year, that's what he gets, right? Pretty sweet. 55 years old, he was certainly still young enough that he could have a retirement job if he so wished. He could even go on to work directly at the Second Mile and probably start drawing a salary easily enough. The retirement package from Penn State also granted him emeritus status at Penn State due to his tenured position pre-retirement. So he kept his rank and title. He was allowed unlimited access to all football facilities and all recreational facilities. had a parking pass for the campus, an office on site. So, I mean, even though he's retired, he basically still has an entire life there that is his in perpetuity until he dies, right? The only thing that's changed is he's actually no longer required to work for any of this. I mean, he could if he wanted to. Everything is still there, but he wasn't required to. And if he did work, it would be pro bono, right? Now, you do have to wonder what Joe Pa knew and when he knew it. And the authors point out that he knew everything that happened in his kingdom, even citing an incident when one of his players got a speeding citation in another state. Joe Pa knew about it. Charlie Pittman, who was among the first quarterbacks Paterno coached, is quoted in the book as saying, "I don't want to presuppose anything because most of the story has yet to come out, but Joe didn't have a boss at Penn State. He handpicked his own boss in Tim Curley, who was the athletic director. It got to a point where people didn't question him. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, I'm not saying he was corrupt, but the power he created provided the opportunity for corruption to breed." End quote. What did he know and when did he know it? That's a very good question, right? Because I find it very hard to believe that when a mother contacted campus police in May of 1998, furious that her 11-year-old son had showered naked with Jerry Sandusky on campus, that somebody didn't tell Joe Pa. I really find that hard to believe. It strains credulity, is all I'm saying. This, incidentally, is the correct law enforcement agency to complain to. I know people assume campus police are rent-a-cops. They are not. They are post-certified. They are authorized to make arrests and to investigate crimes. Now, most of their crimes investigate things like stealing book bags, petty larceny, maybe sexual assault. Although usually the sexual assault is going to be, the more garden variety, if you will, teen boy, date rape, that sort of thing. The chances that any campus officer is going to have to investigate a sexual assault of a 10-year-old child is pretty slim. But they did it, and they did a hell of a good job with it, too, all right? The alleged crime, and I have to use alleged here because when this book came out, it was released in 2012, shortly after Paterno's death. It was before any trials had occurred. So the authors had to go with alleged for their own, again, protecting themselves from libelous lawsuits. Fair enough. Which actually speaks to the absolute miracle of speedy trial it was, which I'll come back to in a bit, too. Now, at this point in the story, it is an alleged crime which occurred on campus at the Penn State gym, and that a fully adult grown-ass man had showered naked with her 11-year-old son, quote, bear hugging him while both were naked in the shower. It ain't creepy and wrong no matter which way you cut it, right? And I feel like most parents stop showering with their children right around the time the children are old enough to go, what the hell is that? So, yeah. Now, her son had met Sandusky through the second mile. She was a single mother. Their first interaction with Sandusky had been when her son was 7 at a picnic hosted by the second mile. On this particular night in question, May 1998, her 11-year-old was so flustered at the thought of showering with a man that he tried to pick a shower as far from Sandusky as he could, which, totally get it, kid. I wouldn't want to shower with a grown-ass man I didn't know either. But Sandusky was having none of it. He's like, come over here. I already got the shower warmed up. Come on over here to me. And Sandusky proceeded to soap the child up, lathering him all over before rinsing him off. The kid was so freaked out that he asked to be taken home. And of course, we got home. His hair is still wet. His mom's like, why is your hair wet? And her kid told her, Mom, this weird thing just happened to me. And she freaked out. Rightly so. Don't blame her. Good on you, Mom. Now, she, as any mother would do, called the campus police, demanded Sandusky be arrested. Now, Detective Ronald Schreffler took her complaint, and he took it quite seriously, right? He knew this was a profoundly delicate situation that involved a minor child and an allegation against a pillar of the community, right? Jerry Sandusky built the second mile. It has branch offices in Harrisburg, and I think it was Philadelphia, might have been Pittsburgh, but it's got several locations across the state of Pennsylvania. At the heart of it, of course, being right there in State College, Pennsylvania, where Sandusky is situated. But he still conducted a very thorough investigation. Right? He didn't schlep it off. He did his job. He tapped in the Centre County Department for Children and Youth Services, who quite correctly passed the investigation over to the Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare in Harrisburg, citing a conflict of interest because the Centre County Department of Children and Youth Services worked quite closely with the Second Mile, as you might expect, right? It's a charity that's designed to help children at risk. Of course, they're going to work closely with the Department for Children and Youth Services. So they were like, we've got a conflict of interest here. We can't be unbiased. We're going to pass this over to Pennsylvania and let them do the investigation. And yet, despite what was a thorough and above-board investigation, there wasn't enough evidence to say that it wasn't a simple misunderstanding. And Penn State had a psychiatrist come in. They determined that Sandusky did not meet the profile for being a serial offender. This was probably just a misunderstanding. At the time, Penn State Police Department was headed by Administrator Gary Schultz. Ultimately, they decided not to pursue charges. Penn State President Graham Spanier and Joe Paterno would later insist they had never been informed of the investigation. I don't know about that. I do know because they mention it in the book, and I'm not sure exactly when these rumors started, but it eventually became a rumor not to shower with Sandusky. Don't drop the soap. They would make jokes like that in the Penn State shower locker rooms. Again, I find it hard to believe that Paterno was not aware of those jokes and would not then question where those jokes started. The Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare investigator Jerry Liqueur felt that the probe needed more investigation, but without further details, he lacked the ability to do so on his own. So it basically sputtered and went nowhere. And but that was 1 year before Paterno would tell Sandusky, "You're not the heir, you'll never be coach." So again, what did he know and when did he know it? Because there was no earthly reason not to have Sandusky be the head coach. Not with the job he had done with their defensive line. That doesn't make any sense. And the charity was never his priority, and that was pretty clear by the way I don't think he ever missed games. So he showed up, he did his job, he did it outstandingly well, so why wouldn't Paterno have said, yes, you're going to be the next in charge? Now, from here, the timeline does jump around a bit. I mean, all the salient details are presented, but not necessarily in order in which they occurred. There's a reason for that. The first crack where something is known to have happened was 1998, right? 4 years later, March 2002, graduate assistant Mike McQuarrie was on campus one night to pick up some tapes of prospective recruits to review, right? He arrived just after 9 p.m. The athletic complex was dark. I mean, it was spring break, so it wasn't, that's not unusual. There's not going to be a whole lot of people around. As he walked into the locker room, he heard the skin-on-skin sound of sex. And if you've ever had sex, especially shower sex, where all the skin is wet, you know the sound I mean. That slapping, right? That sound. He assumed it was a player with a girlfriend. Maybe a janitor was taking advantage of the fact that nobody was around and they had a football kink. Not an unreasonable assumption. He entered the locker room and he spotted in a mirror Sandusky bent over the form of a 10-year-old child. Not enough alcohol in the world for this one. I'm actually only drinking the Sunday cocktails these days. We did the sober October, and I'm not drinking during the week. I'm just doing the cocktail on Sundays. Good on me, but I really could have used a few cocktails this week. This was a rough one to read. Rough one to see, too. I get it. It was hard for me to read, so I understand McQuarrie's initial reaction was stunned disbelief and shock. Right? He had grown up in State College. He was friends with Sandusky's kids. He played football with his kids. He saw Sandusky as a second father figure and a mentor. Their families were friends. Rather than direct confrontation, McQuarrie quietly backed out to give himself a moment to regroup. I get it. You see something like that, it is going to break your fucking brain, man. It did break somebody's brain. I'll come back to that in a bit. He loudly slammed his locker door and then walked back into the shower, where he saw Sandusky had separated himself from the poor kid, who the authors point out repeatedly, no one tried to find out who this child was. No one tried to help this child. The three made awkward eye contact, and I can bet that was fucking awkward, and McQuarrie left. And this, I tried really, really hard not to fault him for this because I wasn't there. And it's really easy to say, well, I would do the right thing. I would have taken the kid with me. But you don't really know that until you're the one in that position. McQuarrie left. And he left the kid with Sandusky. I don't know how you do that. So I tried very hard not to fault him because I wasn't there, but I once saw a guy beating his dog with a belt at a dog park, and my boyfriend, now husband, had to literally hold me back because I almost ripped the guy's head off. So I like to think I at least would have pulled the kid away. But then he called his dad and asked what should he do. Okay, I don't judge him for that. I think a lot of people would have absolutely no idea what to fucking do in the shock of the moment and would probably call a trusted friend or family member to ask for help on the next steps, right? What I remain absolutely baffled by, like, I do not know how these people sleep at night. How do they look themselves in the mirror? McQuarrie, his dad, and another family friend, I don't remember who, but he was named in the book, was roped into this advice session, all agreed that McQuarrie should report what he saw to Joe Pa. Not one of these adults, not one of these free-thinking adults said, hey, that was a felony. You witnessed rape of a child. Go to the police. Not one of them said that. They all said, go tell Joe Paterno. So while there's plausible deniability from 1998, there's absolutely no deniability after 2002 that Joe Pa knew what was going on. And Joe Pa said, okay, I'll take it from here. And he reported it to athletic director Tim Curley, the one that he, hand-selected to be his own boss, and Penn State Vice President Gary Schultz, who was in charge of the Penn State Police in 1998 and knew about the prior allegation that had been investigated. And these guys decided that the best course of action was to ban Sandusky and the Second Mile kids from using the Penn State facilities. That was their big thing. Like, God, no wonder Sandusky just kept doing it, right? He'd literally been caught in the act, and all he was told is just don't do it on campus. And that was it. McQuarrie was given an assistant coaching position and asked if he was satisfied with the outcome. And he said yes. Guess you had to be there to understand why the police were never even a thought. And another 9 years would pass before Sandusky would be arrested. But the serious investigation into his actions would begin in 2008, spring of 2008, when a mother, and they never name any of the victims or their parents, which is fair. Those people are absolutely entitled to their privacy in this. But a mother was summoned to her son's high school where he was in the middle of a full breakdown after admitting to sexual assaults which occurred under the auspices of the Second Mile by Jerry Sandusky. Now, in 2025, it is widely known that schools are mandated reporters, all right? And they were mandated reporters even back in 2008. The fact that they were mandated reporters was not as widely known back then. The mother insisted that the school call the police, and the school sent her home to consider her options over the weekend. They're like, why don't you go home and think about this before we call the police? She was so pissed, she called a friend of hers who was a social worker. Good on you, Mom. And that social worker made a report and handed it over to the Clinton County District Attorney. I'm guessing the friend lived in Clinton County would be my guess. And from here it snowballs. The investigators, who were not a part of the insular town of State College, Pennsylvania, found at least 10 different victims who all told alarmingly similar stories. Absolutely no reason to disbelieve any of them because none of them knew the others existed. They each thought they were the only one until the indictments were handed down. Sandusky liked his kids between 8 and 12 years of age. There's quite a bit of overlap in his victims. He'd start grooming the next one before the first had quite aged out. They found a janitor who also witnessed and reported an assault in the Penn State locker showers in 2000. Part of why this was out of sequence is the janitor, he ultimately ended up suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. I mean, it's something that made him not a credible witness at the time of the grand jury testimony and later arrest. But he had reported that what he saw was worse than things he had seen in actual combat. I forget what I was Vietnam or Gulf War maybe, but he's like, yeah, that's worse than anything I ever saw in combat, and it broke his brain. And I said he ended up with dementia or Alzheimer's. Real star here is State Police Officer Corporal Joe Leiter, who was the first to believe that Sandusky was a serial predator. He didn't think this was a one-off thing with that kid. He tracked down the other victims, first through interviews with kids from the second mile, which is not easy because they don't always know each other's last names, right? But he tracked them down, and then he also read through Sandusky's autobiography, which is ironically called, and I shit you not, Touched, the Jerry Sandusky story. Boy, could he have picked a more ironic fucking name for his autobiography. Touched. Yeah, you like to touch kids, all right. But he used the names and the pictures in the book to track down even more victims. Now, the book was published in 98 or 99, and the pictures went back a decade from there. Many now believe he was raping children from the time he opened the second mile in 1977 up until he was forcefully stopped with his arrest. Sandusky was arrested on November 5th, 2011, and the arrest shocked the nation. I mean, I live in Nevada, which is hell and gone from Pennsylvania, and I heard about it. The Penn State Board of Trustees fired Paterno, like, within 2 weeks, which the student body rioted over, because of course they fucking did. And I gotta wonder if even one of those little shits later thought about it, later got a little reflective and said, wait a minute. How did Joe not know this? What about the victims? I mean, Paterno had made honor and doing the right thing his whole ethos, right? He preached that to every single one of his football players, right? Yet when it came time to do the right thing, he chose not to. And the only reason I could think of is he was worried that if news got out, it would tarnish his legacy. And boy, did he miss the boat on that one. And in a horribly ironic twist, if he had just done the right thing, his legacy would remain intact. He would be regaled the world over as a just man who did the hard thing in the face of a scandal and protected the innocent. And instead he died 2 months later. While Penn State mourned him in droves, the rest of the country thinks of him in disgust as the catalyst to allow a serial rapist to keep preying on children in the name of protecting some bullshit legacy. Now, as I said, the arrest happened on November 5th, 2011, right? Joe Paterno died on January 22nd, 2012. His funeral is described in this book, so the book came out after the funeral, but before the trial, because the information from the trial is not included. So I Googled the outcome so I could have some closure here. Jerry Sandusky went to trial for 52 charges of sexual crimes against children on June 11th, 2012. Trial lasted 8 days. Jury returned a verdict of guilty on 45 counts on June 22nd, 2012. He faced a maximum of 442 years in prison with a minimum of 60 years. His earliest possible release, assuming he gets parole, will actually be October 9th, 2042. He will be 98 years old. I hope he dies in prison. Other Penn State staff who were tried out of this were Timothy Curley, Gary Schultz, and Graham Spanier, who was the Penn State president when all this went down. So Curley and Schultz both ultimately pled guilty to child endangerment in exchange for dismissing the conspiracy charges against them. That was March 13th, 2017. They served various jail sentences. I don't think either of them served more than 2 years. Spanier was convicted of child endangerment in March of 2017. His conviction was overturned and then reinstated. Went back and forth, and I think he also served less than 2 years. And on some level, Paterno had to know that this burying what was happening was going to come back and bite him in the ass. And I absolutely believe he knew what kind of man Sandusky was. He had to know his legacy was ruined the moment he chose silence. As I said at the start of the review, he was an educated man. He was a classicist. His favorite work was Virgil's The Aeneid. And the book closes with an entirely appropriate quote from Paterno. Quote, "As Aeneas found out, life comes down on you with some terrible whacks if you don't do the right thing." End quote. And that's it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe. I have no doubt I have pissed off some people today because there are still people who think Paterno was wrongly fired. And I'll see you guys next Sunday. Bye.